Where Loyalties Lie, Honor Guard, by the Loyalliar. Chapter 6, Ignoble. Shining Armor, ever proud of his fitness, nevertheless found himself panting desperately as he struggled to keep up with the massive strides of Soldier On. The buildings of Canterlot flew past him at an astonishing rate. Crowds of ponies, unaware of the true threat their nation faced, parted with indignation as the two soldiers barreled by. When the larger mare skidded to a stop, her hooves were set firmly in the sand of the Royal Guard headquarters' sandy training ground. She seemed both the most relaxed and calmest of ponies present. 3 other guards' ponies were standing together in the yard. Only one noticed the approaching captains, and he seemed far too perturbed to recall anything. What's going on here? Signing shouted as approaching the huddled group. His words had been meant for the honor guard captain, but they were answered instead by a surprisingly young filly, one of the 3 recruits clustered around the sand.
Captain! Oh, thanks, Celestia. We were just on patrol when doing double cycles like you ordered, and we stopped to get some coffee, so we...
Stop! The captain ordered, silencing her with her hoof. His steady gait had brought him into the rough circle of his 3 subordinates. And what he found in the center told him more than he truly needed to know. Laying there on the red-stained wet sand was the body of a guard's pony, liberated from its head. There were 1,000 thoughts flying through his mind as he processed the corpse, but the first to gain his focus was his duty to the still living troops. You 3, go inside, sit down, get some water. But Captain, he's... He didn't need to shout. A cold directive was more than enough to override their fear. That was an order. As the 3 terrified recruits shuffled away, Shiny took a deep breath and remembered how he had felt standing in their hooves. He shook himself quickly to free his mind of the memory and set to work. His first action was a burst of magic to clean the powder from the stallion's face. As the chalky substance gathered into a tiny ball, matted turquoise fur was revealed. You need to come with me. He looked back at Soldier On, who stood expectantly at the doorway to the headquarters. She seemed totally unaffected by the decapitated body a dozen feet away, and the severed head 3 feet beyond. Her apathy set Shining Armor on edge. Why were you the one who told me about this, Soldier On? Upstairs, was all she said. I'm not done here. This one was one of mine, Soldier On. She nodded slowly, and then turned to the structure. I will speak to your recruits. No. The Royal Guard didn't look up from his work, as he slowly disassembled the fallen soldier's armor. Wait. I'll take care of them. Soldier On's tone made it clear as he took offense. Do you not trust me, Shining Armor? The unicorn spared his attention from the corpse long enough to offer a look of pitying judgment in Soldier On's direction. They need to hear this from me on. He turned back to the body, clearing away the powder from his cutie mark. His focus again interrupted by the Stalingradi mare, however. I can explain to them. Perhaps it was the stress of the crime scene, or the continuing pressure of putting up with the nobles, or perhaps it was a slowly growing realization that he could not save the princess. Whatever source it came from, Shining Armor's strained emotions brought out the cold, unfeeling truth. Your honor guard. They might not know what you do, but I've heard stories. I'm going to be the one to talk to them, because it still bothers me when I see a dead body. With a snort, he turned his head back to the corpse again and pulled away his golden armor. Especially this one. Soldier On allowed a deep breath, then offered him a deep nod. Who is he? Mark down. He was a friend of mine. I'm sorry. Shining stood up, hardening his face. His only thought was that he didn't believe her. The words were too hollow, too controlled. We should go inside. Soldier On held the door for him. The captain's purple armor glinted one last bit in the evening sun before it entered the shadowy, empty interior of the headquarters. In the lobby, he immediately set his eyes on the 3 recruits, sitting on the cushioned benches in the waiting area and talking in hunched tones amongst themselves. One mare had obviously been crying, while the other held a foreleg around her shoulders. The lone stallion of the group stared vacantly into the glass of water as he whispered. Shiny took a deep breath and walked forward as casually as he could manage. All three younger ponies lit up as he approached.
Captain.
The more lucid mare muttered, offering a surprisingly stiff salute. He shook his head and waved a hoof to brush off the formality of the motion. No need right now. I understand you ponies have probably never seen something like this before. He took a deep breath, pondering where they could even believe his words. When they saw him only as a distant leader, it was hard to be a comforting presence. This is what we fight against, as guards ponies. This is what we protect every pony else from. I'm not going to tell you to be bothered. This hit me just the way it hit you. This shouldn't have happened. But we're facing a challenge now, and we do need to be strong. His hoof grated slowly across the wooden floorboards, the only sound in a quiet, chilled lobby. Did any of you want to ask anything? The crying mare lifted her head, sucked a sniffling breath, and spoke up in broken tones.
Did you know him?
The answer was hard. It was Shining's pride that he knew the names of most of the royal guard. Even he had not bothered with such focus. He still would have been familiar with the dead pony laying outside. That was Lieutenant Markdown. He was one of the best guards ponies I ever had the pleasure of knowing. We went through basic training together.
He was my brother.
Shining Armor froze up as the world changed, and twilight sparkles sobbed before him. Her face was pressed heavily into Celestia's shoulders as the monarch slowly lowered a polished coffin into a deep pit in Canterlot Cemetery. The unicorn's body convulsed with every breath. All around were guards ponies, Saber present in a long tunnel. A horn called as one of the guards ponies began to speak. Captain Armor? He shook himself, once more actually seeing the mare standing in front of him. Her coat was a powdered white, not lavender, and the wings on her back could not have belonged to a unicorn. Irony. I'm sorry. I was just thinking back. He looked back as he turned around the room again, regaining his bearings. Then slowly, he let his eyes fall on the unfortunate mare. What's your name?
Private Rundown, Captain.
Rundown? I'm very, very, very sorry for your loss. I can't tell you that we're going to make everything better, but I'm going to do everything in my power to catch whoever did this. Do you remember seeing anything that might have to do with this? The stallion of the group spoke up to answer. We were in the yard when he came back with another guards pony, Pegasus. I didn't recognize him, but I think he was a sergeant from the neckbands. A little while later, another pony came by. He was a unicorn, but I didn't see his rank. He had powder on. After he went inside, we heard fighting, but even before we made it into the doors, Lieutenant Down just came flying. His voice trailed off as Rundown broke into tears again. He shook his head, leaned forward, and whispered softly. He was thrown out the window like that, Captain. I think it was your window. Shining Armor took a step back, as his mind reeled with confusion and concern. Thank you, Private. Private Down, take some leave. A week at least. More if you need it. That is an order. He turned back to the stallion. You go to the palace. Find Princess Celestia and tell her what happened here. If any pony else asks about me, you can tell them that I'm busy, but you are not to tell them about this. Do you understand? Yes, sir! After a smart salute, he galloped off. Shining's gaze finally shifted to the other mare in the room. Private, I need you to head downstairs and bring up a bag. He sadly prayed she knew what he meant.
Captain, with respect, I'd like to be with Rundown. She needs some pony.
Shining Armor shook his head slowly, desperately wishing he could grant their request. We all need some pony right now, Private. The guard can't spare you. Rundown, you should go home. Your family will be there for you. I'll be there as soon as possible to deliver a formal apology. With those final words, Shining Armor stepped away, turning toward the stairs to his office. Soldier on followed with a heavy gait, waiting until they were up the stairs and out of earshot to speak again. You have the gift for words, Captain. I'm terrible, compared to Captain Vigil. She nearly gave me the same speech when I was a corporal. What happened? It was during the Griffin border conflict 7 years ago. My friend had his throat slit. Soldier-On closed her eyes for a moment and offered only a curt nod. It was the first time I ever saw any pony die. Did they give you leave? He shook his head. They couldn't spare me. 3 years later, when I was made captain, she asked me if I remember what she said. She told me I have to give the speech too. She was a good captain. Shining Armor vacantly nodded. At least it was the easy speech. He set his hoof down on the squeaky floorboard on the upper hallway. Only a few more steps left. His horn ignited in magic, pushing gently on a door that still hung ajar. It swung smoothly inward. The office was a mess. His desk and chair had been both overturned, lying at crooked angles on the floor. The walls of portraits was now nearly blank, with only 3 pictures still hanging soundly. The rest had fallen to the floor, where their glass lay broken in a rough minefield of shards. Some bore fresh blood. His other 2 chairs, for guests and guards ponies, were broken into planks and cushions, whose paddling was spilled into the sea of chaos on the floor. The bookshelves of records and histories on the opposite wall were likewise spread every which way. In the center of the chaos lay the Pegasus stallion, breathing slowly despite the obvious damage to his body. Shards of glass had cut through his throat to his neck, legs, and flank. None were deep enough to cause any real threat, but at a glance they seemed terrifyingly deadly. A heavy bruise was already beginning to form on one of his eyes. The worst wound by far, though, was his left wing, which hung barely connected to the rest of his body at its shoulder. Tendon, muscle, and even bone were clearly visible where feather and flesh had been torn away. The wound had clotted into a nasty mess, but not before coating his entire olive green side in crimson. Shining stared at the pony, but the face had no meaning to him. I don't recognize this one. Is he the attacker? Thundercrack. He's on the guard. Shining was momentarily stunned. Then his focus returned, and his horn ignited. The body of the injured stallion was surrounded in magic, though it remained unmoved. What are you doing? Checking for internal injuries. It seems like he'll be fine, though I don't know how well the wing will heal. Now tell me, how you knew about this? Why were you the one who told me? His irritated tone had apparently earned her distrust in return. Her accent grew thicker as her tone regained speed. Because the messenger found me first. Is this an issue, Armor? Do you have a reason not to trust me? Yeah, I do. Shining released his magic on Thundercrack's body and began to slowly levitate the shards of glass, sweeping them into a pile on the corner. I just found one of your guards in my office, and one of my best friends is dead. The honor guard has had its hooves in this plot way too many times. Soldier-On responded only with silence. Shining's mind ignored her, dancing a 1,000 lines of processed thought. Despite what he said aloud, he already knew that Thundercrack hadn't killed Mark Down, nor had Mark Down been the one to damage Crack's wing. The logic he had given her was simply easier than trying to justify his hunch. The wounds didn't match a battle between 2 Pegasi. A third party had been involved, armed with a blade of some sort, and winged blades didn't cut as cleanly as he had seen. Able to walk the floor cleanly, Shining stepped towards his desk. You called a doctor? Just before I found you. He should be here soon. Good. His words were running on autopilot as his mind focused. The chairs had been smashed when somebody was thrown into them. Hard. A strong unicorn could have done it, but a big earth pony was more likely. His eyes flashed up to Soldier-On before he discarded the idea. The subject would have bruising around the fetlocks if it was indeed an earth pony. So he might have hid that sort of wound, but not while running to the palace and back. There wasn't much else to find for the pile of destroyed furniture. Shining's solid oak desk, lying on its side beside the window, was much more useful. The organized chaos of his paperwork was strewn behind it, and several drawers were hanging open. His magic searched the scene as his eyes analyzed the carnage. Beneath the desk, he saw something. A little silver of metal. He casually hefted the heavy wooden surface with his magic and righted it. The metal then flew free, brought up to his careful examination by the same rose-colored light. It was the fragmented edge of a finely honed blade, and had broken from a blunt throw, thrust directly against something too hard for it to pierce. He's seen that sword damaged hundreds of times on the broken spearheads of new recruits who tried fancy tricks at the drill range. The only difference was the quality of the metal. He pocketed the shard, determined to speak to some pony who knew much more about the topics. His eyes glanced over the scene once more, and froze on the pile of papers at his hooves. Lines upon lines of text stared back out, mesmerizing his eyes with an overload of unread information. Every page sat face up. With a sudden focus, he gathered them into a single pile and began to read. Each familiar header he tossed away in an idle heap against the floor. "What are you looking for?" "Some pony's been through this." His pace quickened. "They were looking for something." Pages flew from his telekinetic grip. 2, 3, even 4 at a time. About halfway through the stack, he stopped. Motivated by the Blizzard Revolution, regardless, this traitor knows where Masquerade is and is maintaining contact with her. Given that information, this traitor must have come from one of the other 2 guards. While I cannot rule out the Night Guard, what I know of them suggests they would not betray Princess Luna. One of us can ask Princess Celestia about them. However, given this conclusion, I'm led to believe that there exists a real traitor on the Honor Guard. This will explain how Masquerade was able to catch their captain off guard and assassinate him unnoticed, especially given his reputation for solitude, and how she was able to establish a time and place to insert herself into the royal palace. It also brings up a big problem. Amongst the papers I got were maps of the Royal Guard's deployment across Equestria. I don't know how they got this, or what their plan is, but I do know that you functionally emptied the cantle out of the Royal Guard, and at least the level of knowledge regarding the Royal Honor Guard's deployment as well. I can't say this for sure, but I know that there are many of them around, either. Shining, we may not be looking at an assassination plot here. This could very well be a full-scale rebellion. I know that doesn't make much sense, but neither do a lot of things. While I'm able to speak to you face to face, we can discuss this further. But I think I might have asked a few of the questions to the wrong ponies. I'll be fine, just like in Sabrika, but if you read this and I'm not around, my best suggestion would be to stay close to Princess Celestia, and don't trust any pony. Your magic should be able to hold off any move any pony might make against her, even if the traitor is Honor Guard. I don't think I can't see it disappear and find some more information. If you need to find me before I find you, ask Grizz. Don't bring the armor. Good luck, Shiny. Maybe we'll save Equestria again. Lieutenant down. Shining lowered the page, feeling as though he had seen a ghost. He could almost hear Mark's cocky voice in his head, especially at the end. His mind was racing with 10,000 possible reactions. It took him a moment of blank-faced thought to choose a course of action. Though he didn't channel enough mana to bring a glow to his horn, he readied himself. As casually as possible, he lowered his center of gravity, ready for an attack. Only when he was truly ready for violence did he speak his mind. Why is Thundercrack here? I found some pony who was working with Masquerade. She ultimately gave us the directions to some pony who had been questioning her. Ultimately? The word sat wrong on Shining's tongue. Soldier On ignored him. We went after the pony she pointed us to, and found him meeting with some pony else. I followed the other pony. Sergeant Crack followed the target. He turned out to be your lieutenant. What happened to your lead? I lost him, so I went to find Sergeant Crack. We agreed to meet up in front of the palace. I waited there until a messenger showed up, looking for you. Shining closed his eyes and offered a single nod. Though he had little more reason to trust her, he felt safe enough to release the hold on his magic. And then his host began to carry him out of the room. Where are you going? Back to the stable of nobles. I need to talk to the princess. It was then that an idea came to his mind. One might have brought over pride to the judgmental politicking of his in-laws. You're welcome to join me, he told her, in the most inviting voice he could imagine, in the lights of the event of the given day. No. She offered a glance at Thundercrack, then down beside the floor. I will wait for the doctors. When he awakens, we can learn from him who your lieutenant was talking to. Then we can go from there. Agreed. Shining offered a final bob of his head in acknowledgement of the mayor who bore the title of his peer, and then strode out of his ruined office. Rather than fear or sadness, he found his every step brimming with determination. It wasn't an emotion that most ponies would feel after the death of a close friend and a deepening threat to their very world. Most ponies weren't like Shining Armor. It wasn't that he lacked sadness or compassion. Instead, he had set such feelings aside for when he could afford them. For the first time in days, he no longer faced an issue of decisions in politics. It was time to hunt.
This is where we're staying? It's kinda...
Rainbow found herself searching for the right word. Her usual lame or lousy wouldn't cut it. Rarity would probably say something like
rustic.
but it wasn't quite a good word either. She needed something else, something more specific, something like
Ramshackle.
Marathon offered.
I know. It used to be a mail station 50 or so years ago. The ponies were still trying to map the jungle. Now no ponies out here except old Deadeye.
The building in question was a tiny lodge made of thin planks that were falling off. The roof and walls were overrun with ivy, which made the holes in the ceiling less obvious, but filled the room with funny patterns of light and darkness. Rainbow sat staring into the door-shaped hole that had long since lost its door, and wondered aloud something entirely unrelated.
Why do you call him that? You'll see in a minute, Rainbow.
No, I don't think I will. He's not here.
Ugh. Is this really happening? We flew 4,000 miles, and this guy isn't even going to show up?
Relax, Rainbow. She pulled a bag from over her armor and carried it into the center of the room. There, she opened it, revealing a rather large pile of medical supplies, topped by 4 enormous daffodil and daisy sandwiches. When the wind from her wings began to disturb the pile, the messenger pony awkwardly lowered herself onto the stumps of her back legs and folded down on the floor. We need to eat, even if he was here. Come on, sit down. If you say so. Rainbow nervously moved to a building. I don't trust this place. Looks like it's about to fall over. Marathon shook her head and answered with a teasing voice. I know it doesn't look so great, but this place has been standing longer than you have.
It'll hold up for dinner, unless Rainbow Das, Equestria's greatest architect, says otherwise.
Actually, I do know a little. My grandpa's a cloud architect. Marathon's brows rose ever so slightly as she took a bite of her sandwich. After a bit of chewing, she broke a quick smile.
Every pony's got their surprises. Well...
Her words were cut off by not a loud noise or the attack of a surprising monster, but a little tingling, like bells. The sound was accompanied by a spread of green sparks, which coalesced into a scroll that fell gently atop the pile of supplies. Rainbow and Marathon stared at the letter for a few moments before the faster of the two ponies snatched it off and ripped off the seal. Looks like my friends finally wrote me back. Let's see. My most trusted honor guard. Today I received some grave news. Dr. Expectulitis, the stallion I tasked with treating my sister, has diagnosed her condition. His assessment came with what I must unfortunately call a deadline. Princess Luna has lost her timelessness. Her immortality, as many ponies would call it. She's aging to death. The doctor gives her 5 days before it claims her life. I know you're already doing your very best, but please, for my sake if not hers, there are not many I could turn to, if not you. Princess Celestia. Rainbow set down the letter as he pronounced the last words, and simply looked forward. She seemed to forget the jungle, the food, and Marathon.
Rainbow, are you there?
The racer answered by grabbing her sandwich and wolfing it down in 2 enormous bites. Then, with a powerful determination, she walked out of the little cabin.
Rainbow, don't go out there. It's dangerous.
Yeah, well, I'm a guards pony now. Dangerous what we do, right? I promised the princess I would save Luna, and that's what I'm going to do! Rainbow squared herself, then broke into a run. Marathon took the wing, struggling to fly after the mare racing on foot into the unknown.
This is stupid. You don't even know where he is.
Des didn't feel the need to stop, so instead she shouted back as her running became flight. Who said I'm looking for him? I'm going to find a cure for Luna on my own!
Rainbow, stop!
Marathon pumped her wings, only to see the rainbow tail of her charge pass off into the distance.
You don't know what...
The words were lost in the wind. Rainbow, for her part, veered past tree after tree, swerving, diving at impossibly tight angles. The speed she maintained through the natural obstacle course would have turned the Wonderbolts green, though at that moment they were as far from her mind as any pony could be. Instead, her thoughts were of Luna, and Celestia, and 1,000 other things that could go wrong. There wasn't time to wait, especially when Marathon crashed down from the canopy to block her path. We need to talk, Rainbow. No! Then shut up and listen! The intensity of Marathon's shout was enough to convince Rainbow to spread her wings, stopping her flight on a dime. Already, she lost sight of the pathetic cabin and shelter in the thick trees and the vines that surrounded them. The air was a blanket of humid heat and buzzing insects. None of it seemed to matter when the flying mare put her face up against Dash's and spoke in the sharpest, most serious tone to have left her mouth since their introduction. I get that this seems urgent, but you have to understand you have no idea what you're doing. You're running off into the jungle without any food, water, or a plan. Were you just hoping to run into a magical cure-all plant face first? You need to stop and wait. Getting yourself killed won't help Luna. Then I will know that. Rainbow hated to admit it, but Marathon was right. She didn't know what she was looking for. Flying off does seem to have been the best way to get it. She still didn't want to wait for some pony that wasn't showing up. Well then where the hay? The words stopped meaning anything about the time a feline roar escaped the air just a few dozen feet inside the pair. Slowly, their heads turned toward the jungle, and the pair of glowing eyes peering through the thick undergrowth. What's that? Rainbow whispered. Manticores. 2, I think. Just try and back away slowly, but be ready to fly. Her wings beat the air slowly as possible. You start going back that way. What Marathon had intended to do suddenly became irrelevant, as one of the monsters lunged out at her. While she moved quickly enough to avoid a lethal claw to the head, the creature's heavy leon paw landed a heavy blow to her wing. The force sent the Messenger into a spiral that ended with a sudden thud, as her face met dirt. Marathon! Daz immediately surged forward, straight toward the monster. His paw swiped again, wide and strong, but too slow to ever catch the racer. Rainbow slid under the attack with ease, before thrusting a hoof forward into the creature's muzzle. The inertia of her incredible speed was enough to leave the creature railing, and the opening was all Rainbow needed to get inside its guard. As its wings flared, trying to escape, Rainbow stomped down on its shoulder. The feathery limbs seized and crumpled, but before its scorpion tail could strike, the chromatic attacker darted away again. What's wrong, big guy? Can't keep up? Rainbow! Look out! Marathon's shouted warning came in just in time for the younger of the pair to dodge a heavy paw of rake from the second manticore, lunging out of the wilds. Okay, 2 of you. Now we're talking. Rainbow twisted her head from side to side, watching as the 2 creatures paced wildly around her, waiting for an opening. They were each larger than the beast she and her friends had encountered in the Everfree forest. Fluttershy had been right in calling that one a little baby kitty cat. Rainbow waited until one of the creatures was straight in front of her eyes, and the other directly behind her. She wasn't really watching them, though. Her attention was on her ears. The creatures both lunged at one, and Daz let herself crack a small smile. It was just like how the Wonderbolts timed a death-defying double dive, with the 2 ponies flying loops beneath your belly. You couldn't see where your opening in the formation was. Instead, you tied by hearing and waiting. Rainbow's timing was perfect. As the 2 manticores lunged out at her, she thrust up with her wings, and then thrust out all 4 legs in a double buck. The sensation on all 4 of her hooves told her she had scored the muzzle of the back manticore, while her eyes let her know that the other had taken the blow to its neck. That unfortunate creature crumpled beneath her, as she rolled forward to avoid a reprisal from the still conscious monster at her back. Its roar of pain was deafening, and the breath that accompanied it blew back Rainbow's mane like a hurricane. It only took a shake to restore her usual style, though, and then her eyes were back on the action. The creature was still circling her, though its comrade had taken it out of the picture. Rainbow wondered what sort of opening it was hoping for. She started walking in her own wide circle, keeping her eyes on the creature. Then, everything in the world went mad. Something small and gray shot out of the jungle to her left. Her head swiveled to watch it. That was the opening the manticore had been looking for. Rainbow was tackled to the side as the creature roared and dove fangs first. Rather than her coat, it found in empty air. Daz pulled herself to her hooves, and with a quick thrust of wind, found herself staring at the back of the other Pegasus. The stallion was surprisingly old, with a coat that had long since turned gray, was now taking a further turn toward pure white. What little remained of his messily cut hair, mane, and tail bore the same colors. His flanks bore a cutie mark of a map, punctuated by a red line dash and a bold X. You will stop now. His voice seemed to echo in the air, as his focus was locked into the creature. Rainbow couldn't see his face, but he certainly could imagine it, by the look of petrification and fear decorating the manticore. Sit down, close your eyes. The creature obeyed timidly, curling into a little ball. The stallion walked forward slowly, and then turned his head to some sort of stick poking out from under his folded wings. His teeth wrapped around the end, and with a flick of his neck, he pulled free a long, rounded steel blade. The hiss of metal leaving the sheath did nothing to stop the creature's trembling fear. Instead, it remained still and nearly silent as the pony lined up his blade with its neck, and then drew up onto his hind legs. Something in Rainbow forced her to close her eyes. All she heard was the noise. It began with a hum, and then became more of a whistling, before it ended with the sound of a small splash and a gentle trickle. Then came the hiss again as the blade was put away. With no small trepidation, she opened her eyes. What are you doing here, Marathon? The stallion's voice was calm, smooth, untroubled by the moment's violence.
Well, looking out for her right now.
Marathon, who was brushing herself off as she took the wing, offered a quick nod in Rainbow's direction.
Actually, I guess he was kind of looking out for me.
The stallion turned Rainbow's way, and for the first time she saw his face. His left eye was the most noticeable of his features. The orb was a solid blank white, fractured by what looked like a crack. The eyelid surrounding it was marred by 3 parallel scratches, which ran the length of his face and part down his neck. His other eye, a sharp blue thing with a definite focus, seemed to notice Rainbow's attention. With a smile, he slapped the side of his head. Rainbow recoiled, wings flaring, as his eye flew 3, only to be caught deftly by his wing. Don't worry, it's just glass. His feathers turned it over idly, inspecting the cracks. Did you bring me the new one, Marathon?
Yeah.
Good. He pressed the false eye back into his socket, and then smiled disarmingly as he could manage at Rainbow. So, what's the Royal Guard doing down here? He scratched the dirty hoof against the tan safari shirt covering his chest. The garment itself was held down by a dozen other leather straps and belts that held random tools and bags to his sides. Rainbow couldn't help but feel her eyes gravitate toward the sword beneath his wings.
You killed it,
she whispered. What? She coughed to clear the throat.
It was afraid of you, and you killed it!
The stallion gave her a confused stare, and then turned to Marathon. Sees that grin? Marathon answered with a short shrug, which left the stallion to return his one-eyed gaze to Rainbow. Listen to me, kid. It was him or us, all right? I could stare them down for a few moments if I could keep my focus.
That was the stare? You used the stare, then you killed it!
Look, we can talk about this later. What's your name? What are you doing here?
Rainbow opened her mouth to speak, but Marathon was faster on the uptake. Apparently, after her introduction to Magnus, she had lost the privilege of introducing herself. This is Rainbow Dash.
You're the one who tried to take on Nightmare Moon a few years ago? He saw her cocky grin, ruined by a little splash of blood on the corner of his mouth. So, what are you doing way out here at Guard's pony armor? Did you join up with the Royal Guard?
She's with us, did I?
Rainbow shouldn't have been surprised by the name, having seen his glass eye, but her mind had been too consumed by the bloody sword beneath his wing to process his identity. Realizing he was to be her partner, she recoiled with wings flared. The motion grabbed his notice, and in order to counter her fear, he offered her a wide smile. I have to admit, I'm surprised at your honor guard, but you certainly got fight in you. I'm dead reckoning. He offered her a hoof. She stared at it for a moment before realizing he wanted a shake. She saw out her own hoof too fast, trying to deal with the awkwardness of the situation, and found herself slapping his ankle instead. If the motion bothered him, he made no mention of it. We should get back to the cabin. At least first class. I take it you did come out here just to meet me.
The three ponies made their way out of the jungle clearing. Rainbow paused only long enough to glance back at the clean red slit that decorated the neck of the manticore and the pool of blood gathering around it. Shining Armor plodded to the royal ballroom with a fire in his eyes and a burning in his heart where he had buried all the other raw emotion of the day. He was a guard pony first. The mourning friend would have to wait. He resolved not to show the nobles either sorrow or rage. As he scanned the gathered crowd again, he saw them no merely as obnoxious rulers, but as sources and players, and perhaps even conspirators and criminals as well. Chief among these high-living lowlifes was the stallion who stood chatting with his wife at the far end of the room. "Blue blood," Shining uttered under his breath, his tone bearing the disgust of having bit into an apple and only found half a worm. His host settled into a steady rhythm as he drew towards the stallion.
That is right, my dear Cadenza. My dear Cadenza, is why we ought to have stayed together after the bicentennial. I do rather regret the way I came across that night.
It seems you and I recall the crystal ball very differently, Prince. Perhaps we can compare memories some other time, though.
She leaned past the theoretically noble Prince and smiled at her approaching husband. A real prince. He didn't think much about the fact that he didn't smile back, as his gaze quickly met that of Prince Blueblood. The two stallions, of nearly identical size and strength, met each other eye to eye and glared. "Captain." The word might as well have been pronounced commoner. "Prince Blueblood," Shining responded. "It's always a pleasure to meet you." "I do wish I could say the same, but I'm afraid the sight of you always brings me back to my own days in the guard. I've always felt a pony like myself could do much more for Equestria, Madison, Catalog's protective, peaceful ponies." "I couldn't agree more, Prince. Now, I hate to steal her away, but I need to share a few words with my wife." "Of course, Captain. I was just leaving." He bowed deeply in Caden's direction, as Shining resisted the urge to stab him in the flank. When he rose, he offered only a quick glance to the military pony, before striding away with his chest puffed out and muzzle in the air. Cadence rolled her eyes as she walked to her husband's side.
"I still don't get it. We're married, and he still thinks I might be interested in him?"
"I don't know, Cadence. He's always been like that, even when he was in the guard." His few, rather unimportant words were enough to clue Cadence that something was wrong.
"Is something wrong?"
Just for a moment, the captain considered lying. Ultimately, he knew it would do no good. His wife was far more than capable of reading the little twitches of his face. "Do you remember my friend, Mark Down? He was at the wedding."
"I think so. He was a Pegasus, right? His cutie mark was a checklist?"
Shining nodded grimly. The motion was enough to strike Cadence's fear.
Did something happen? Is he all right?"
"No, Cadence.
He's dead."
Her mouth hung open just for a moment. Then she lifted the Shining Armor and clung to him in a tight hug. She pressed her neck tightly against his and leaned up to whisper in his ear.
"Are you safe, Shining?"
It would have seemed a silly question for the captain of the guard, were he any other pony. In her eyes, he might as well have been invincible. "Of course," he lied. He didn't expect to fool her, but he could not bring himself to admit that his life was in danger. "But I'd like it if you left Canterlot, for just a few days."
"What?"
"Just until things settle down. I'm worried, Cadence. About you."
"I could stay with Twilight for a few days."
"Not Ponyville," he whispered. "It's too close. Not back to the Crystal Empire, either. Head back to Rome with your family when they leave tomorrow."
"I guess I could do that, Shining. But what about you? Are you going to be safe? What are you going to do here?"
He just rubbed his neck against hers and then stepped away. "I'm going to save Equestria." He knew his tone lacked confidence, but it was enough to earn a smile from Cadence, and that was enough for him. "Now, go back to visiting. I have to talk to Princess Celestia." He looked around the room, then turned back to the pink alicorn before him. "Have you seen her?"
She came down for a few moments, but didn't stay. I think she went to the gallery, upstairs."
"Thank you."
He turned away, only to stop in hesitation, turned back, and offered his wife a short parting kiss. I love you, Cadence. I love you too, dear. His woes carried him away from his love, up the red-carpeted stairs, and through the palace with ease and familiarity. He hopped a short distance to the gallery would get him there without any interruptions. But he was currently learning quickly that there was no hope of going through his day uninterrupted.
Oh, Sanyoma, is that you? Oh, I am glad I ran into you.
The boisterous, echoing address could have only belonged to the captain's father-in-law. Sure enough, Soranzo Esquivel approached from across the hallway, eyes twitching to the side to ensure no pony was around. What are you doing up here?
Is that to be a warning, Captain? I'll have you know that the princess opened the entire palace to us.
I was just wondering. You seemed concerned that some pony will catch you here.
To be honest, I would rather our conversation stay between us.
The heavy unicorn gave a final quick look around the barren upper hallway, and then finally returned his attention to shining armor.
There's an issue that is on the mind of every pony here today, even if none of them are actually talking about it.
You mean Princess Luna's poisoning? Shining raised an eyebrow, and then lowered both into a glare. Do you know something, Soranzo?
Do you honestly think I would be mad enough to try and keep such a secret from Celestia? No, my coat, I don't know anything. That's not what I meant. In fact, though, it isn't far from the idea.
Then what's the point? Shining pressed. I need to speak to Princess as soon as possible.
Fine, Captain, fine. I was hoping to speak with you of what will happen in the event that we are unable to save Princess Luna.
Shining armor's every tiny motion stopped, as his mind drifted back to a grim afternoon 2 days earlier, when Celestia had broke her eternal calm demeanor for the first time in years, and worry over the nobles who were coming over to her side. What do you mean? Stefanzo dragged a deep breath and shook his head.
Well, if one of the princesses were to pass away, their gift, as it were, would be passed on to another pony.
It sounded ridiculous, almost like a fairy tale. Shini's disbelief must have been obvious to the Prince of Bitterly, who held up a hoof and continued.
1,000 years ago, Princess Celestia told my ancestors this, before she went into battle with Nightmare Moon.
That doesn't make sense. She used the elements of harmony. She never meant to kill Luna.
Princess Luna meant to kill her.
Stefanzo took another slow breath, and his head scanned the room. Then his tone dropped to a surprisingly forceful whisper.
Do you understand what I'm asking?
Shiny thought for a moment, only to grow angry at the realization. You're actually asking me to tell the princess that you should gain control of the moon? He stepped past the battalion ruler, shaking his head. I think you should forget about it.
No, Shining Armor. I know when you and I do not always see eye to eye, but I do not mean myself. There is some pony we can agree on.
Shining stopped in his tracks, though he did not turn back to look at his father-in-law. Cadence.
Mi amore cadenza. My daughter is an alicorn with experience in leadership and a kind heart. She helped your sister save Equestria from the changelings and is a personal friend of the princess herself. She ought to be a perfect choice, but coming from me, it would sound like a stallion trying to take advantage of a dying princess for his own gain.
I'm not interested in getting into politics, Stefanzo. I'm a soldier.
The only differences between you and I are the battlefield we fight on and the weapons we use. I understand that this might seem wrong to you, but your family needs you now. I know you'll do the right thing.
Shining still didn't turn, but he heard the hooves of the other pony walk way down the hall. Part of him felt as though such a statement would be the same thing as giving up on Luna's life. He shrugged the thought for the layer. It wasn't his job to make these sort of decisions. He needed to find Celestia. The rest of the walk to the Grand Royal Gallery of Canterlot was short and uneventful. When the captain reached the door, it opened with only a slight press of his hoof. The room inside wasn't particularly large, and its art wasn't particularly notable. The vast majority of the pieces were gifts that visitors had given to Celestia, and as a result, the princess's face was the subject of far too much of the room. Perhaps a desire for contrast was what gave the walls their dark-hued gray paint, and kept only the dim chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Amidst this darkness, an alicorn walked. Shining at first expected the princess, but it was not her body that strode amongst the statues and paintings. Instead, as the captain approached, he saw a surprisingly short, thin alicorn stallion with a surprisingly peculiarly long horn. The shadows of the room gave the cavities of his cheeks a mysterious air, but at the same time drew attention to the rough state of his mane and tail. At first, he seemed to not notice the approach of the other pony. His head craned back, looking up at the wall above the paintings. "Good evening," Shining softly greeted. "I disagree," the stallion answered, with a firm and stately tone. "Our princess is dying, and I have lost a friend. But thank you for your courtesy." He stepped away, craning his neck to the other corner of the room. After a long pause that felt uncomfortably quiet to Shining Armor, he spoke up again. "I guess I haven't gotten to introduce myself. I'm Shining Armor." "Watchful Eye," the other pony responded bluntly. "I've heard of you, Captain. My sons have much to say of you earlier today." "Your sons? Are you the Tsar of Stalingrad?" "In title," Watchful Eye answered with as much chill as the wind in his home. "Forgive me if I'm not in the mood for such talk." "You said you've lost a friend." Shining scratched a hoof on the floor, knowing how awkward his question would inevitably be. "Was it from the assassin?" To Shining's surprise, the Tsar nodded. "I'm afraid, though, that you already know everything I could tell you. Come here, and tell me what you see." As the captain walked forward, Watchful Eyes pointed a hoof on a high point on the wall. "It's a mantle, I guess, with statues on it?" "Yes. Look at how they are arranged." His hoof moved with his voice, tracing around the room. Shining's eyes passed statue after statue, each about 4 feet from the next. They all depicted stallions, with rather generic faces in stale gray. His eyes, as well as the Tsar's hoof, stopped on an empty space just above the door to the room, where a statue ought to have been. Instead, there was an 8-foot gap between the two statues. One's missing? "Many rooms in this palace have this feature, Shining Armor. The audience hall, the ballroom, and even Princess Celestia's bedroom. All are missing a single statue. It was my friend's place, as he watched over the princess." Shining looked down at the smaller stallion with sudden curiosity. "You mean the commander?" "I never knew him by name. When we met years ago, he went by Sarab Pozvolka. Even then, all the way in Stalingrad, his mind was on protecting the princess. When he brought me back here, he showed me these places, where he would sit, blending in with the statue. That was his life. Now that he's gone. I'm sorry." "All ponies lose friends, Shining Armor. It is the nature of life. But you did not come here to share philosophy and sadness with me." "No, you're right. I came looking for Princess Celestia." Watchful Eye nodded. "She is already gone to prepare for the stable. You and I will be summoned in a matter of minutes. Until then, you should wait." "I ought to speak with her soon." "Nothing will happen to her here, in the palace." Shining nodded, and began wandering around the room. All the while, a single thought gnawed at his mind. His eyes looked at the countless pictures of Celestia, no different than how he had seen her his whole life. The tiny plaques beneath the portraits declared that they were hundreds of years old. Could he imagine Cadence this way? His eyes drifted back to the other pony in the room. His cutie mark, a fiery red gem in the shape of an eye, watched Shining Armor back. The guard's pony couldn't help but wonder at 1,000 questions about the Alicorn ruler. "Can I ask you a question?" "I do not promise an answer, but I would not presume to tell you what you may say." "Do you want to take Luna's place?" The question was jarring enough to tear the Alicorn's focus from the empty space above the door. It did not seem to truly bother him. "Do you ask this because I have both wings and a horn? I'm not a powerful mage, nor a skilled flyer, My knife has not lent itself to the gifts of my body. I would gain no use from Luna's power. Shining nodded, but then pressed the question from a different angle. His mind thought of his beloved rather than the foreign pony before him when he spoke. What about living forever? I do not want to live forever, Shining Armor. It was the worst pain in the world for me to lose my youngest son. I have no intention of watching the rest of my family grow old and pass away while I am still young. He looked straight at the unicorn with a surprising intensity. Princess Celestia is a beautiful mare. She could have any stallion in Equestria if she wanted. Have you ever considered why she has no foals of her own? The unicorn's confusion and surprise. Shining Armor nodded and answered with two simple words. Thank you. Whatever else was to be said to the strange pony, he had answered the question lingering in the back of Shining Armor's mind. No sooner did the thought left his mind than one of the palace staff entered the room, guiding the two toward the fateful meeting of the night. Equestria's fastest flyer only was as her only friend in the honor guard flew off into the sunset over Sabrica. Every few moments she would throw a glance over her shoulder to where Dead Reckoning was sitting on Runpound Post Depot. Marathon had spent the last hour discussing some sort of political stuff, which Rainbow was allowed to hear. Instead, she had been given some food and sent it to sit outside the hut, watching the jungle and waiting. The whole time she had been thinking. She thought of her friends, particularly Fluttershy. She wondered what the meek little pony would think if she knew some pony else had used the stare to kill a cowering, helpless creature. Though Rainbow had no intention of admitting it, the way the honor guard had coldly killed the creature was still sending her off. Every few moments, when a noise came from the jungle, she would twitch at it, expecting something to leap out at her. Instead, it would turn out to be the wind, or a small animal, or something else that didn't matter when all was said and done. She patted the smooth golden armor on her chest. Couldn't help but feel like she was being abandoned out in the wilds. She didn't know this dead-eye pony, and even if he was a guard's pony, she certainly didn't trust him.
Who hasn't her go?
The sudden voice, from no more than a foot behind Rainbow, was enough to shock her into a hover 12 feet in the air. Flora was ready to strike.
Relax, kid. I'm not going to hurt you.
Yeah. Rainbow drifted down. Dead Reckoning was leaning against the door of the hut, watching her with his one blue eye. Sorry, I just wasn't expecting you.
I know. I'm not usually that quiet. Come down, kid. I'd like to talk to you.
Rainbow glided down and sat facing him. His missing eye, now replaced with a cracked 3 orb, seemed to watch her just as closely as the normal colored one.
I bothered you when I killed the manticore today.
She didn't respond, and in her stillness he continued.
Don't try to act tough, kid. I'm not going to hold it against you, but we do need to talk this through.
Rainbow nodded, and taking a moment to find words. Why did you have to kill it?
Because it would have otherwise killed us.
No, it wouldn't. It was afraid. Dead Reckoning closed both his eyes, and his body shifted up and down in a slow breath.
It was afraid because I used my magic on it. You called it the stare?
Yeah, my friend Fluttershy could do it too. I thought she was the only one.
Well, the stare only works as long as you maintain eye contact. That's especially hard for me now, so I can only do it for a couple of seconds. I had to end it then.
Why didn't you just tell it to leave us alone? To Rainbow's surprise, the stallion only opened his eyes. His eyebrow rose high into his balding brow in something resembling confusion or surprise.
Because I can't. It's a manticore. It isn't going to listen.
Fluttershy could tell things to stop fighting, and she even did it to a dragon once. Dead Reckoning's other eye opened, and then he nodded.
That your friend's stare is a lot better than mine. That's strong magic. Anyway, do you understand why I did what I did?
Yeah. I guess.
I don't expect you to be comfortable with me killing something. We don't get much of that in Equestria, thankfully. Out here, though, that's how you survive. It was us or it. Can you accept that?
Yeah, I guess.
Good kid.
He shook his head and then gestured with a wing into the back of the shadowy structure.
Toss your armor in there, and then we can get going.
You want me to leave my armor behind?
Unless you really enjoy Rastus and swords, yeah. It's too humid in the jungle for metal armor, and nasty stuff will get in your sweat. If you really want to wear something, I've got another safari suit in the closet there.
Rainbow didn't need any further motivation. She pulled off her armor and tossed it aside, before moving to the small rack that he had called a closet. Off its one short rack, she grabbed a tan shirt, and to her infinite happiness, a shallow pith helmet. She didn't need a mirror to know exactly how she looked. Daring Do would be proud. She stepped out of the hut again, where Dead Reckoning was waiting with saddlebags. "Where are we going?" Rainbow asked. She let him put his fangs on her back.
There's a mad elk healer who lives a few hundred miles into the jungle. We're going to see if he knows anything about this poison. But first, we have to lay out some ground rules.
"Oh, come on! We don't have time to waste!" Dead Reckoning started walking into the jungle, gesturing for Rainbow to follow. Their pace was slow, as the stallion seemed to be paying closer attention to Rainbow than his destination.
That's what the rules are for, Rainbow, so we don't end up wasting our time fighting monsters and falling into quicksand every 20 minutes. The jungle's dangerous. Rule number 1 is always stay in line of sight of me. Shouldn't be too hard, but it's important for both of us. I expect you to be watching for predators in the jungle.
He tapped the left side of his face.
Pretty easy to blindside me these days.
"Stick together. Got it."
Good. Second rule is do not fly unless you have to, and never fly above the canopy.
"What? That's stupid! What do you all guards ponies have against using your wings?"
I've got nothing against using your wings, kid. They're nice wings if I do say so myself.
Rainbow flushed her color and growled under her breath, as the old stallion let out a chuckle.
I'm only teasing. There are a set of wing blades in your bag, once I teach you how to use them. The reason you don't fly is because of all the flying monsters in the jungle. Manticores are nowhere near the scariest things you'll find in here, and most everything will soar up and get you if they can see you up out in the open.
Rainbow threw her back cockily. "Please, nothing's gonna catch me. I'm the fastest flyer in Equestria." Dead Reckoning raised his his eyes proud again.
Well, that's fine, if you say so, but I want to know how long you can keep that speed up. The closest edge of the jungle is 200 miles west, at Give Ridge. You get tired before then, and then there'll be something out there waiting to gulp you down. Understand?
Rainbow groaned. "Ugh! Fine! No flying!"
Reckoning smiled. Good. Those are the rules. Now, why don't you tell me how you ended up here?